I was knee-deep in mud, trying to pull my hay baler out of the south field when a silver BMW pulled up to my fence line, and out stepped a woman in a pristine white pantsuit who looked like she'd never touched dirt in her entire life. "Excuse me, are you Trevor Garrison?" She called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over to the fence, squinting against the afternoon sun. "That's me. Who's asking?" "My name is Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She thrust a manila envelope through the fence slats like she was serving me with divorce papers. "This is a formal notice of violation. That unsightly farming equipment needs to be removed from your property within 30 days, or we'll be forced to take legal action." I stared at her, then at the envelope, then back at her. "Madam, this is Garrison Farm. My family's owned this land since 1947. I don't know what homeowners association you're talking about, but it's got nothing to do with me." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Garrison, when you purchased property within Meadowbrook Estates, you agreed to abide by our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Agricultural equipment visible from the street is strictly prohibited. It brings down property values. I didn't purchase anything. I inherited this farm from my father 3 years ago, and before him, it was my grandfather's. We've been farming this land for 78 years. That may be, but the HOA was established in 1985, and your property falls within our boundaries. The CCRs are binding on all properties, regardless of when you acquired them." She adjusted her sunglasses. "Read the notice. You have 30 days. She climbed back into her BMW and drove off, leaving me standing there with mud on my boots and confusion in my head. I opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Sure enough, it was a formal violation notice, citing section after section of rules I'd never heard of. No visible farm equipment, no commercial vehicles, no structures that don't match the aesthetic character of the neighborhood. I looked around at my property. 320 acres of working farmland in rural Nebraska, just outside Omaha. The old red barn my grandfather built. The machine shed. The hay baler, the tractor, the combine. This was a farm, not some cookie-cutter suburban development. I called my lawyer the next morning. Dennis had handled my father's estate, and I trusted him to tell me straight. "Trevor, I'm going to be honest with you," Dennis said over the phone. "This is complicated. Did your father ever mention anything about an HOA? Not once. He would have told me. He would have fought it. Let me do some research. In the meantime, don't remove anything and don't sign anything they give you. I'll look into the property records and see what's going on." 2 weeks later, I was baling hay in the west field when I saw a flatbed truck pull up to my equipment shed. 2 men got out and started walking toward my hay baler, the one I just repaired and pulled from the south field. I killed the engine on my tractor and jogged over. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The taller one held up a clipboard. "We're here to remove the agricultural equipment per HOA Order 2024-47. Says here we're authorized to impound any items in violation after the 30-day notice period." "The hell you are. Get off my property." "Sir, we're just doing our job. The HOA hired us to enforce their ruling." "I don't care who hired you. This is my equipment on my land. You touch it, I'm calling the police." The shorter guy pulled out his phone. "Why don't we call them right now and sort this out?" "Fine by me." 10 minutes later, Deputy Martinez from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office pulled up. I'd known Charlie Martinez since high school. He'd bought sweet corn from us every summer. "Trevor, what's going on?" Charlie asked, stepping out of his patrol car. I explained the situation while Patricia Henderson arrived in her BMW, apparently summoned by the towing company. She immediately launched into a speech about property rights and HOA authority. Charlie held up his hand. "Madam, I understand your position, but this is a civil matter. Unless you have a court order authorizing the seizure of this equipment, these gentlemen need to leave." "We have every right under the covenants. Do you have a court order?" Charlie asked again, his tone patient but firm. Patricia's face flushed red. "No, but then this is a civil dispute that needs to be resolved in court. You cannot simply take someone's property without due process." He turned to the towing company. "Gentlemen, I suggest you leave now." After they'd all gone, Charlie walked with me back to the house. "Trevor, you need to take this seriously. HOAs can be vicious, and if they think they're in the right, they won't back down. I've got Dennis looking into it." "Good. Keep me updated." He paused at his car. "Your grandfather would have raised hell about this." "Yeah, he would have." Dennis called that afternoon. "Trevor, I've been through all the county records. Your property has been in continuous family ownership since 1947. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was incorporated in 1985, like the Henderson woman said. But here's the interesting part. The original plat map for the HOA development shows your farm's boundaries clearly marked and excluded. So I'm not part of the HOA. It's not that simple. About 5 years ago, the HOA amended their boundaries. They filed new documents with the county that expanded their jurisdiction to include several surrounding properties, including yours. But I don't think they did it legally. What do you mean? When an HOA expands its boundaries, they need consent from the affected property owners. There's no record of your father ever signing anything. In fact, I found a letter he wrote to the county clerk's office in 2020, objecting to the boundary change. My father had known about this. He'd fought it, and apparently he'd died before it was resolved. The cancer had taken him quickly, just 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. He probably meant to tell me about it, but ran out of time. "What do we do?" I asked. "We fight back." "I'll file a motion to exclude your property from the HOA's jurisdiction. But Trevor, you need to be prepared. This could get expensive and take months, maybe years." "I'm not letting them take my farm, Dennis, whatever it costs." "I know. I'll start drafting the paperwork." The next week, I received another notice from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 per day for every day the equipment remained visible. According to their math, I already owed $15,000. I called Dennis. "They're insane. They can't do this." "They can try. Ignore it for now. We'll address all of this in court." But ignoring it became harder when Patricia Henderson started showing up at my farm every few days, sometimes with other HOA board members. They'd stand at the fence line, taking pictures, making notes, documenting every violation. My tractor was a violation. My barn needed repainting, which was a violation. The gravel driveway didn't meet their standards. The fence was the wrong color. One morning, I found a real estate flyer stuck in my mailbox. "Thinking of selling. We pay cash." It listed a local investment company. When I researched them online, I found they were owned by Patricia Henderson's husband. They didn't want compliance. They wanted my land. Dennis filed our motion in Douglas County District Court in early November. The HOA responded with their own filing, demanding not only that I pay the accumulated fines, which now totaled over $40,000, but also that I remove all farming equipment, repaint all structures to match their approved color palette, and pave my driveway with asphalt. "They're trying to make it impossible for you to operate as a farm," Dennis said when we met to discuss their response. "If you can't have equipment visible and you can't have agricultural structures, you can't farm. Can they really do this? They're going to try, but we have a strong case." Your property predates their HOA by nearly 40 years. You never consented to join. Your father actively opposed it. And most importantly, you have a legal right to continue the agricultural use that's been established for over 7 decades. The preliminary hearing was set for January. In the meantime, I had a farm to run. Winter was coming, which meant preparing equipment, securing buildings, and making sure everything was ready for the spring planting season. But the HOA wasn't done with me. In December, I received a notice from the Douglas County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed multiple complaints about my property. Unlicensed vehicles, unpermitted structures, zoning violations. I called the county office and spoke with a tired-sounding inspector named Tom Reynolds. "Mr. Garrison, I've got to come out and investigate these complaints. It's my job." "I understand. When can you come?" Tom arrived the next morning in a county truck. He was a stocky man in his 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. I showed him around the property, explaining the history and use of each building and piece of equipment. He made notes, took some measurements, and reviewed my property records. Finally, he said, "Mr. Garrison, you're grandfathered in for agricultural use. This land has been farmed continuously for decades. None of these complaints hold water. So I'm in the clear. With the county, yes. Whatever dispute you have with your HOA is between you and them. But as far as county code is concerned, you're operating a legitimate farm on properly zoned agricultural land." He paused. "Off the record, I've been getting a lot of complaints from this Henderson woman. She's filed reports on half a dozen properties around here. I think she's trying to use my office to harass people. Can you do anything about that? If she keeps filing frivolous complaints, I can recommend the county take action against her for wasting government resources." "But that's not a quick process." He shook my hand. "Good luck with your court case." The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas alone, thinking about my father and grandfather and all the Christmases we'd celebrated on this farm. My grandfather used to say that land was more than dirt and grass. It was family, history, memory. Every acre had a story. I wasn't going to let some HOA president with a real estate scheme take that away. The preliminary hearing in January was my first real look at what I was up against. Patricia Henderson showed up with 3 other HOA board members and a lawyer who looked like he charged $500 an hour. Their lawyer, Richard something, wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Dennis and I sat at the defendant's table while they presented their case to Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Richard laid out the HOA's position. I had purchased property within their jurisdiction. The covenants were legally binding. I was in violation and owed substantial fines. They were asking the court to enforce the covenants and order me to comply. When it was our turn, Dennis stood and calmly presented our evidence. The property deed showing continuous family ownership since 1947. The original HOA plat map excluding my farm. The lack of any agreement from my father to join the HOA. The letter my father had written objecting to the boundary expansion. Judge Morrison studied the documents. "Mr. Reynolds, how does the HOA claim jurisdiction over a property that was explicitly excluded from the original plat map?" Richard cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the HOA legally amended its boundaries in 2019, following all proper procedures with the county." "Did you obtain consent from the affected property owners?" "The amendment was filed in accordance with Nebraska statutes." "That's not what I asked. Did you obtain consent from Mr. Garrison's father, who owned the property at the time?" "We sent notice to all affected properties." "Notice is not consent, counsel." Judge Morrison looked over her glasses at him. "Mr. Foster, What does Nebraska law say about expanding HOA boundaries to include existing properties? Dennis had been waiting for this. Your Honor, Nebraska Revised Statute 21-1941 requires that any amendment to an HOA's declaration that affects a property owner's rights must be approved by that property owner. Simply filing paperwork with the county doesn't automatically bind non-consenting owners, especially those whose property was explicitly excluded from the original HOA. Judge Morrison made some notes. I'm going to need time to review all of this. This isn't a simple matter of covenant enforcement. There are substantial questions about jurisdiction and due process. I'm setting a full hearing for March 15th. In the meantime, the HOA is enjoined from taking any enforcement action against Mr. Garrison's property, including accumulating fines or attempting to seize equipment. Patricia Henderson looked like she wanted to explode. As we filed out of the courtroom, she cornered me in the hallway. You think you've won, but you haven't. That farm is going to be part of Meadowbrook Estates one way or another. Is that a threat? It's a promise. She turned on her heel and walked away. Dennis pulled me aside. Trevor, document everything from now on. Every interaction, every piece of mail, every time they show up at your property. I think they're going to try something. He was right. A week later, I was repairing a fence near the road when a county surveyor showed up, saying he'd been hired to verify property boundaries in the area. He spent 2 hours measuring and marking, then left without much explanation. 3 days after that, I received a letter from a law firm in Omaha, different from the one representing the HOA. It informed me that I was encroaching on HOA common property and needed to remove my fence and restore the land. I called Dennis immediately. Now they're saying my fence is on their property. Send me everything. I'll look into it. Dennis discovered that the HOA had commissioned their own survey, which conveniently showed that my fence was 3 feet over the boundary line onto what they claimed was common area. The problem was, my fence had been in the same location since 1952, built by my grandfather. I had photographs proving it. They're getting desperate, Dennis said. They know the March hearing isn't going to go their way, so they're trying to create new problems. We'll address this in court as well. February brought bitter cold and heavy snow. Farming in Nebraska, winters meant maintaining equipment, checking on fences, and making sure everything would be ready when spring arrived. I spent most days in the heated workshop, rebuilding the engine on my older tractor. One afternoon, while I was under the tractor, I heard vehicles pull up outside. I rolled out and walked to the workshop door to find 2 sheriff's deputies, neither of them Charlie Martinez. Trevor Garrison. The older deputy asked, "That's me. We have a warrant to search the premises for stolen property." My stomach dropped. "What stolen property?" He showed me the warrant. According to the document, someone had reported that I was in possession of a hay baler, serial number matching one reported stolen from a farm in Sarpy County. That's my hay baler. I've owned it for 5 years. I have the bill of sale. Then you won't mind if we verify that. I led them to the equipment shed where the hay baler sat. They checked the serial number against their report, took photos, and called it in. 20 minutes later, they confirmed what I already knew. The serial number on my baler didn't match the stolen one. In fact, the stolen baler had been recovered 3 days earlier. Who filed the report? I asked. The younger deputy checked his notes. Anonymous tip called in yesterday. Gave your name and address, described the equipment and location. Pretty specific for an anonymous call. After they left, I called Dennis, and then Charlie Martinez. Charlie agreed to meet me at a diner in town that evening. "Trevor, someone's playing games with you," Charlie said over coffee. Filing a false police report is a crime, but proving who did it when it was anonymous is almost impossible. It has to be the HOA. Who else would do this? Probably, but we need proof. The call came from a burner phone, untraceable. He leaned back. Look, off the record, I've been hearing things. Patricia Henderson has been talking around town about how she's going to clean up the area, get rid of all the old farms, make it upscale residential. She sees your place as an eyesore in the middle of her planned community. My farm isn't an eyesore. It's been here longer than she's been alive. I know, but she's got money and connections. Be careful. The harassment escalated. My mailbox was knocked over twice in 1 week. Someone cut my fence in 3 places, and I found cattle grazing on the road at 5 in the morning. The local feed store called to tell me someone had tried to cancel my standing order and close my account, claiming to be calling on my behalf. I installed security cameras around the property, focusing on the areas near the road and the main buildings. Within 2 days, the cameras caught someone in a dark sedan slowly driving by at night, stopping to take pictures. Dennis suggested we file a restraining order against Patricia Henderson, but I wanted to wait until after the March hearing. Let's see what the judge says first. If we can get my property excluded from their jurisdiction, this all goes away. The hearing couldn't come fast enough. When March 15th finally arrived, I put on my only suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral, and met Dennis at the courthouse. The courtroom was larger than the one used for the preliminary hearing. Judge Morrison sat at the bench, reviewing documents as we filed in. The HOA had brought their entire board this time, plus their expensive lawyer and a consultant who specialized in covenant enforcement. I had Dennis and a folder full of evidence. The hearing lasted 4 hours. The HOA's lawyer argued that the boundary amendment was legal and binding, that proper notice had been given, and that HOAs had broad authority to enforce their covenants. They brought up property values, neighborhood aesthetics, and the importance of uniform standards. Dennis countered with the history of the property, the explicit exclusion from the original plat, my father's written objection, and the lack of consent. He argued that you couldn't retroactively force someone into an HOA, especially when their property use predated the HOA's existence by 4 decades. The HOA's consultant testified about the negative impact of agricultural operations on surrounding property values. Dennis cross-examined him thoroughly. Sir, you testified that farm equipment visible from the road reduces property values. Is that correct? Yes, that's been demonstrated in multiple studies. And these studies were they conducted in areas where farms existed before residential development? Well, the specific circumstances vary. Because Mr. Garrison's farm has been operating since 1947. The Meadowbrook Estates development was built in 1985. Wouldn't potential buyers of homes in that development have been aware that there was an active farm nearby? I suppose they could have been. In fact, isn't it common for residential developments to market themselves as rural or country living when they are near agricultural land? Sometimes, yes. So buyers who purchased homes in Meadowbrook Estates in 1985 knew or should have known that there was a working farm adjacent to their development. Objection, calls for speculation, Richard interjected. Sustained, Judge Morrison said, but she was taking notes. We broke for lunch, then came back for more testimony. Patricia Henderson took the stand, and Dennis questioned her about her husband's real estate company and their interest in acquiring my property. Mrs. Henderson, does your husband's company, Henderson Investment Properties, specialize in land development? Among other things, yes. And you're aware that your husband has expressed interest in purchasing Mr. Garrison's property? He may have mentioned it. In fact, didn't you personally place a flyer in Mr. Garrison's mailbox advertising cash purchases of property? She shifted in her seat. We distribute those flyers throughout the area. But you did personally place one in his mailbox. I don't recall specifically. Dennis pulled out a copy of the flyer and a still image from my security camera showing Patricia's BMW at my mailbox. Does this refresh your memory? Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Henderson, please answer the question. Yes, I may have left a flyer there. And your husband's company would stand to profit significantly if Mr. Garrison were forced to sell his property, wouldn't it? Objection. Relevance, Richard said, standing up. Your Honor, it goes to motive, Dennis argued. The HOA president stands to personally benefit financially if Mr. Garrison is driven off his property. I'll allow it. Mrs. Henderson, please answer. Patricia's face was red. We're legitimate real estate investors. If Mr. Garrison chose to sell, yes, we might make an offer. But that has nothing to do with HOA enforcement, doesn't it? You filed over 40 violations against Mr. Garrison's property in 6 months. You've attempted to seize his equipment. You've accumulated over $60,000 in fines. You've filed complaints with county code enforcement, all of which were found to be without merit. This seems less like covenant enforcement and more like harassment designed to force a sale. That's absurd. Dennis returned to our table and pulled out another document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit 17. This is an email exchange between Mrs. Henderson and the other HOA board members, obtained through discovery. In it, she explicitly states that if they can force Mr. Garrison out, the property could be subdivided into 30 residential lots, which would substantially increase HOA dues revenue. Judge Morrison took the document and read it carefully. The courtroom was silent. Patricia Henderson looked like she wanted to disappear. After reviewing the email, Judge Morrison said, "We'll take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I'll hear closing arguments." During the recess, Dennis was cautiously optimistic. That email was the smoking gun. It shows this isn't about covenant enforcement at all. When we reconvened, Richard gave a closing argument focused on the technical legality of the boundary amendment and the HOA's authority. Dennis gave a passionate speech about property rights, family heritage, and the abuse of HOA power. Then we waited while Judge Morrison reviewed her notes. Finally, she looked up. I've listened carefully to the arguments and reviewed all the evidence. This case raises important questions about HOA authority and property rights. On one hand, HOAs serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining community standards. On the other hand, they cannot be allowed to abuse their power to force unwilling property owners into their jurisdiction, especially when there's evidence of improper motive. She paused, and my heart was pounding. The facts are clear. Mr. Garrison's property has been in continuous agricultural use since 1947. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was established in 1985, and the original plat map explicitly excluded the Garrison farm. In 2019, the HOA attempted to amend their boundaries to include the farm, but they did not obtain the consent of the property owner, which is required under Nebraska law. Patricia Henderson's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. Furthermore, the evidence shows that the HOA's enforcement actions were not taken in good faith. The email exchanges demonstrate that the HOA president had a personal financial interest in acquiring Mr. Garrison's property and used her position to attempt to force a sale. This is an abuse of HOA authority and potentially constitutes harassment. I could barely breathe. Therefore, I rule as follows. First, Mr. Garrison's property is hereby excluded from the jurisdiction of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The 2019 boundary amendment is void as it applies to his property. Second, all fines and penalties imposed by the HOA are vacated. Third, the HOA is permanently enjoined from taking any enforcement action against Mr. Garrison's property. Fourth, I am awarding Mr. Garrison attorney's fees in the amount of $18,000 to be paid by the HOA within 90 days. I felt Dennis grab my shoulder. We'd won, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the Nebraska Attorney General's office for investigation into potential abuse of HOA authority and harassment. Mrs. Henderson, if the evidence supports criminal charges, you could face prosecution. Patricia Henderson looked like she might faint. Her expensive lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear. Court is adjourned. Dennis and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright March sunshine. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. We did it, Dennis said, shaking my hand. Your farm is safe. Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. Your grandfather would be proud. So would your father. That night I walked around the farm looking at everything with new eyes. The old barn, the equipment shed, the fields that would soon be ready for planting. This land had been in my family for 78 years, and it would stay in my family. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 weeks after the hearing, Charlie Martinez called me. Trevor, you need to know something. The Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation into the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They're looking at Patricia Henderson and the board for fraud, harassment, and abuse of power. What did they find? Apparently, your case wasn't the only one. They've been targeting several property owners in the area, trying to force them out so Henderson's husband could buy the land cheap. It's basically a real estate scheme dressed up as HOA enforcement. How many people? At least 6 that they know of. Some of them gave up and sold. One elderly couple lost their home because they couldn't afford to fight the fines. My blood ran cold. That's criminal. Yes, it is. The AG is building a case. They want to talk to you. I met with an investigator from the Attorney General's office in April. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was thorough and professional. I told her everything: the harassment, the false police report, the attempted seizure of my equipment, the surveillance, the threats. She took detailed notes and asked pointed questions. Mr. Garrison, you mentioned that Mrs. Henderson told you the farm would become part of Meadowbrook Estates one way or another. Did you interpret that as a threat? Absolutely. She was making it clear they weren't going to stop. And the surveillance, the cut fences, the false police report, you believe the HOA was responsible? I can't prove it, but yes. The timing was too convenient, Sarah nodded. We're gathering evidence from multiple victims. The pattern is clear. Identify properties they want, use the HOA to make life impossible for the owners, force a sale at below market value, then develop the land. It's systematic and it's illegal. In June, the indictments came down. Patricia Henderson was charged with fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of authority. 2 other board members were also charged. Richard, the HOA's lawyer, was being investigated by the State Bar Association for ethical violations. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. HOA president charged in land scheme. I read it over breakfast, feeling a sense of justice, but also sadness for the people who'd lost their homes before anyone stopped Henderson. The trial was set for September. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Wung, contacted me in July to let me know I'd be called as a witness. Your case is central to the prosecution, she said. You fought back, you documented everything, and you won. That gives us the foundation to show this was a pattern of illegal conduct. I'll testify. Whatever you need. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I spent an entire day on the witness stand, describing what had happened and how the HOA had tried to force me off my land. The defense lawyer tried to make it seem like a simple dispute over covenants, but the email evidence and testimony from other victims painted a clear picture. The elderly couple Charlie had mentioned, the Kowalskis, testified about how they'd been fined into bankruptcy over violations like the wrong color mailbox and grass that was a 1/4 inch too tall. They'd sold their home of 30 years for half its value just to escape the debt. A single mother named Maria Rodriguez testified about how the HOA had threatened to put a lien on her house over a children's swing set in her backyard. She'd removed the swing set, then got fined for the bare patch of grass where it had been. Henderson Investment Properties had bought her house at a foreclosure sale. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Patricia Henderson was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the victims. The judge, different from Judge Morrison but equally stern, said from the bench, "You abused a position of trust and authority to line your pockets. You destroyed lives and families for profit. This court will not tolerate such conduct." Henderson's husband, though not criminally charged, faced multiple civil lawsuits. Henderson Investment Properties went bankrupt. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was dissolved by court order, its remaining assets distributed to the victims as partial restitution. The residents of the development would have to form a new association if they wanted one, under close oversight. I attended the sentencing hearing. When Patricia Henderson was led away in handcuffs, she looked smaller somehow, diminished. I didn't feel triumph, just relief that it was over. The Kowalskis got their house back through a settlement with Henderson Investment Properties bankruptcy trustee. Maria Rodriguez received enough money to buy a new home. The other victims received various forms of compensation, though no amount of money could fully make them whole. For me, the victory wasn't about money. It was about keeping the farm that my grandfather had built, that my father had maintained, that I would now pass on to the next generation. It was about standing up to bullies, even when they had lawyers and rules and the appearance of legitimacy. That fall, I had the best harvest in 5 years. The corn came in strong, the soybeans were plentiful, and the hay was good quality. I hired 2 part-time workers to help with the workload, young guys from town who wanted to learn farming. On a Saturday in October, I hosted a community picnic on the farm. Charlie Martinez came with his family. Dennis brought his wife. Tom Reynolds, the county inspector, stopped by. Even Judge Morrison made a brief appearance, though judges aren't supposed to socialize with people from their cases. We grilled burgers, the kids ran around the fields, and people toured the barn and equipment shed. It was the kind of day my grandfather would have loved. Good food, good people, and the land providing for everyone. Sarah Chen, the Attorney General's investigator, pulled me aside at one point. "Trevor, I want you to know that your case has led to some significant reforms. The state legislature is considering new laws to prevent HOA overreach and protect property owners. What you did matters. I just wanted to keep my farm. You did more than that. You stood up when a lot of people would have given up." As the sun set that evening and people started to leave, I stood on the porch of the farmhouse and looked out over the land. 320 acres of Nebraska soil, worked by 3 generations of Garrisons. The barn needed a new coat of paint, the fence line needed some repairs, and the old combine was acting up again, but it was home. My phone rang. It was Dennis. Trevor, I wanted to let you know the HOA's attorney fees payment came through. $18,000 as ordered. Good. Send me a bill for the rest of what I owe you. Actually, with the fees and the damages you were awarded in the civil settlement, you're more than paid up. In fact, there's about $12,000 left over. I smiled. Put it in the farm account. I've got equipment to repair and a barn to paint. Will do. Take care, Trevor. I hung up and went inside to start dinner. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from peace rather than loneliness. I thought about calling my cousin in Iowa, see if he wanted to come visit next month. The farm was big enough for family, and it had been too long since we'd had a proper reunion. The next morning, Sunday, I was up early to check on the cattle when I noticed someone had left something at my mailbox. My heart jumped, old instincts from the harassment days kicking in. But when I got closer, I saw it was a basket of fresh baked bread with a note. Thank you for fighting. You gave us hope. The Kowalskis, I brought the basket inside and had toast with my coffee. It was good bread, probably made from wheat grown not far from here. That's how it worked in farming communities. We took care of each other, traded goods and help, built something together that was bigger than any one person. Later that week, I got a call from a reporter at the Omaha World-Herald. They wanted to do a feature story about the case and its aftermath. I was hesitant at first, but Dennis encouraged me. People need to know this story, Trevor. HOA abuse is a growing problem across the country. Your experience could help others. So I agreed to an interview. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, came out to the farm on a Wednesday. She took pictures of the property, the equipment, the old barn. We talked for 2 hours about everything that had happened. What would you say to someone who's facing similar harassment from their HOA? She asked. Document everything. Get a good lawyer. Don't back down if you're in the right. And remember that bullies count on people being too scared or too tired to fight. Don't let them win. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition in early November. It was fair and thorough, laying out the facts without sensationalism. I got calls and emails from people all over Nebraska and beyond, sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for speaking out. One email stood out. It was from a veteran in Colorado who was being fined by his HOA for flying the American flag. Your story gave me the courage to hire a lawyer and fight back, he wrote. They've been backing down ever since. That made it all worthwhile. Thanksgiving came, and I hosted dinner at the farmhouse for the first time since my father died. My cousin Jack drove in from Iowa with his family. Some friends from town joined us. We had a 20-pound turkey, mashed potatoes from my own potato crop, green beans, cranberry sauce, and 3 different pies. During dinner, Jack's teenage son asked me about the HOA case. He'd read about it in school as part of a civics lesson on property rights. Uncle Trevor, weren't you scared they might win? I thought about it. Yeah, I was scared. But I was more scared of losing the farm, losing everything Grandpa and your great-uncle built. Sometimes you have to fight even when you're scared. Did you ever want to just give up? Every day. But then I'd look at these fields and remember why it mattered. After dinner, we walked the property line, 3 generations of Garrisons looking at land that had sustained our family for nearly 8 decades. Jack and I talked about the future, about keeping the farm going, about maybe bringing his son into the operation when he graduated high school. This place is special, Jack said. I'm glad you fought for it. It's not just for me, it's for all of us. December brought snow and cold, the quiet time of year when farmers repair and plan and rest. I spent my days in the heated workshop, overhauling equipment and preparing for spring. I decided to expand the operation slightly, adding another 50 acres of soybeans and maybe some wheat. On Christmas Eve, I got a card in the mail from Judge Morrison. It was a simple holiday card, but she'd written a personal note inside. "Thank you for reminding me why I became a judge. Wishing you a peaceful holiday and a prosperous new year." I put it on the mantel next to the cards from Dennis and Charlie and the Kowalskis, and a dozen other people whose lives had touched mine during this ordeal. That evening, I drove into town for the community Christmas Eve service at the Methodist Church. The church was packed, decorated with poinsettias and candles. I sat in a pew near the back and listened to carols I'd known since childhood. When the service ended and everyone filed out into the snowy night, several people stopped to shake my hand and wish me well. I wasn't a hero, just a farmer who'd stood up for his property, but in this small community, that meant something. The new year brought new beginnings. The state legislature passed the HOA Reform Act in February, creating new protections for property owners and limiting the power of HOAs to expand their jurisdiction or impose excessive fines. News articles credited my case as the catalyst for the legislation. I was invited to the state capitol in Lincoln for the bill's signing ceremony. Governor Richards, a practical woman who'd grown up on a farm herself, shook my hand and thanked me for bringing the issue to light. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "Yes, madam, I think he would." Spring arrived right on schedule in mid-March. I spent long days in the fields, planting corn and soybeans, repairing irrigation lines, checking soil quality. The work was hard and the days were long, but it was honest work, the kind that made you tired in a good way. One afternoon in April, I was planting in the south field when I saw a car pull up to the fence line. My guard went up instantly, old reflexes from the HOA days. But when the driver got out, I saw it was an elderly man with white hair and a cane. I killed the tractor engine and walked over. "Can I help you? Are you Trevor Garrison?" "Yes, sir." He extended his hand. "My name is Walter Schmidt. I used to own a farm about 5 miles from here until the Meadowbrook HOA drove me off it in 2018. We shook hands. His grip was firm despite his age. "I read about your case in the newspaper," he continued. "I wanted to come by and thank you. If you'd fought this fight 6 years ago, I might still have my farm. I'm sorry you lost your place. It's done now. I'm too old to farm anyway. But it means something that you won, that you showed these HOA bullies can be beaten. My grandson is thinking about buying farmland now, and he's not afraid anymore. That's because of you." We talked for a while longer, sharing stories about farming and the land and the way things used to be. When he left, he pressed something into my hand, an old brass compass. "This was my grandfather's," he said. "He homesteaded in Nebraska in 1889. I want you to have it. Keep pointing toward true north, son." I watched him drive away, then looked at the compass in my hand. It was tarnished but still worked, the needle steady and sure. I put it in my pocket and went back to planting. That compass sits on my desk now, next to my grandfather's pocket watch and my father's reading glasses. 3 generations, 3 men who worked this land and made it home. I think about them every day when I look at those objects, and I remember what I'm working for. The farm is thriving now. I've hired 2 full-time workers, expanded the operation, and even started selling produce at the farmers market in Omaha on weekends. People like knowing where their food comes from, and I like the connection to the community. Last month, the Meadowbrook Estates residents formed a new homeowners association, a voluntary one with reasonable rules and no Patricia Henderson. They asked me to attend their first meeting to talk about being good neighbors. I went, and we had a productive conversation about respecting each other's property while maintaining community standards. "We're not against farms," the new HOA president, a retired teacher named Bob Williams, told me. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page about being neighborly." "That's all I ever wanted," I said. We agreed on some basic things. I'd keep my equipment maintained and my buildings in good repair. They'd respect my agricultural operations and not complain about normal farming activities. We shook hands, and I felt like maybe, finally, we could all coexist peacefully. Life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. I wake up early, check on the cattle, work the fields, maintain the equipment. It's the same rhythm my father followed and his father before him. There's comfort in that continuity, in being part of something larger than yourself. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch and look at the stars. The sky is big in Nebraska, bigger than anywhere else, and on clear nights you can see forever. I think about everything that happened, all the stress and fear and fighting, and I'm grateful it's over. But I'm more grateful that I didn't give up. The easy thing would have been to sell, take the money, move to town, get a normal job. Plenty of people would have done that. But this farm is more than a business or a piece of property. It's family history, it's connection to the land. It's knowing that your grandfather's hands touched the same fence posts you're repairing today. The hay baler sits in the equipment shed, right where it's always been. It's a good machine, reliable, well-maintained. Every time I use it, I think about Patricia Henderson trying to seize it, trying to take away my ability to work my own land. And I'm reminded that property rights matter, that standing up to bullies matters, that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. Dennis still calls every few weeks to check in. "Just making sure nobody's bothering you," he says. "All quiet," I always respond. Finally, Charlie Martinez stops by sometimes when he's patrolling the area. We drink coffee on the porch and talk about crops and weather and anything but HOAs. His kids love visiting the farm, chasing chickens and learning to drive the tractor in low gear around the yard. The Kowalskis invited me to their house for dinner last month. They'd moved back into their old place, redecorating and making it home again. Over pot roast and potatoes, Mrs. Kowalski said, "We never thought we'd be back here. Thank you for fighting when we couldn't." "You would have done the same for me," I said. "Maybe, but you actually did it." I've started thinking about the future more seriously. I'm 38 years old, unmarried, no kids. At some point, I need to think about what happens to the farm when I'm gone. Maybe I'll get married, have children, pass it down the traditional way. Maybe I'll leave it to Jack's son, keep it in the family through a different branch. Or maybe I'll create a trust, ensure it stays farmland in perpetuity. Those are questions for another day. For now, I'm content to work the land, maintain the buildings, and be part of this community. Yesterday, I got a letter from a law student at the University of Nebraska. She's writing a paper about property rights and HOA overreach, using my case as a primary example. She asked if she could interview me for her research. I wrote back and agreed. If my experience can educate future lawyers about protecting property rights, that's worth an hour of my time. This morning, I was out checking fence lines when I found a surveyor's stake I'd missed before, left over from when the HOA had tried to claim I was encroaching on their land. I pulled it up and tossed it in the back of my truck. That chapter is closed. Tonight, I'll grill a steak from one of my own cattle, make a salad from vegetables I grew, and crack open a beer from a brewery in Omaha that buys my barley. I'll eat on the porch, watching the sun set over fields that have fed my family for 78 years, and I'll be grateful. Grateful for good lawyers and fair judges and friends who stood by me. Grateful for the courage to fight when it would have been easier to quit. Grateful for land that's been kind to my family for 3 generations. The farm isn't just dirt and crops and machinery. It's home, it's history, it's legacy. And thanks to a judge who understood that a farm that predates an HOA by 40 years can't simply be absorbed against the owner's will, it'll stay that way for years to come. Patricia Henderson is in prison, the HOA is dissolved, and I'm still here, working the same land my grandfather broke in 1947. That feels like justice to me. Not revenge, not victory, just simple justice. Everyone getting what they deserve. Tomorrow, I'll be up before dawn to start planting the north field. The soil is ready, the weather is right, and there's work to be done. That's farming, always looking forward to the next season, the next harvest, the next year. But tonight, I'll sit on this porch and enjoy the peace I fought so hard to protect. The hay baler is secure in the shed, the equipment is where it belongs, and the farm is safe. My grandfather built something that lasted. My father maintained it, and I defended it when it was threatened. That's the way it should be. That's the way it's going to stay.